Wow, everybody's ahead of me here.
They know the drill.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Please be seated. Thank you. Cassie, could we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Trustee Belt,
Here.
Trustee Krasovich,
Here.
Trustee Roberts,
Here.
Trustee Gergen,
Here.
Trustee Rhodey,
Here.
President Knutson,
Here.
and Trustee Grabowski is out.
Okay, we have two public hearings presentations this evening. The first one is the 2022 audit presentation.
Hey, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me here. Thank you for putting me at the top of the agenda. I appreciate that. And I'll try to get through things in an efficient manner, but do stop and ask me if you have questions, because that's one of the main reasons I'm here. I'm going to focus on what should be part of your packet, some financial highlights, about 7 or 8 pages, hitting on the major funds and some metrics for each one of those. Before I jump into that, just a couple quick things. We did issue finals on May 25th. So within a few days of what where we issued last year as well. We issued what we call an unmodified opinion. It's a clean opinion. It means your financials are prepared according to GAAP. It's a pretty high bar to achieve because of all the different accounting rules. And there was a new one this year, GASB 87, which we've been talking about for a couple of years. I've been talking to Kayla and Scott quite a bit over the last several years about this. It requires leases to be recorded on your books if they're material. And there's two different sides of this. One is a lessee situation, kind of a debtor situation, and the agreements that the village has in place for those, they were not material, so that nothing had to be recorded. On the lessor side, where you have a receivable, those were material, and so you have a new receivable on your water fund of about $2.5 million for the cell tower agreements, and about $46,000 or so in the Lehman Family Lakeside Fund for the agreements that are down in that area. So that was a big change. Some pretty big numbers, and it takes quite a bit of time to look at all those different agreements and the legal terms and such and come up with the accounting entries. So the village successfully implemented that, and that's great news. All right, with that, I'm going to walk you through the numbers. So if you turn to page 1.
Which book? This book?
Oh, nope, they're the, I don't know if you got paper handouts. It would just be probably your packet.
Or the one that's in the packet?
The one in the packet.
Your packet, yeah. So the first page looks like this. It's a bar graph, basically. Some sky blue and some black bar graphs on there. So, and I'm going to put my readers on, apologize. So in governmental fund balance reporting, you can have up to 5 different categories, and the village has 4 in its general fund. And I'm going to start at the bottom because that's the amount that it's really not liquid. It's not available for anything else. It's called non-spendable. And that is made up of about $96,000 in prepaids. Very, very close to last year. Did not change much. Restricted, those are external restrictions, and that went from about $3,300, you can barely see it on there, up to $7,000 in the current year. And about that $3,300 is still in existence, and that's from the amounts that were donated several years ago from the Kept Park maintenance amounts. And the balance, another $3,000 or so, is for election equipment. Nothing committed. Assigned is about $1.2 million. And the detail of all this, and there's quite a few different assignments in your general fund, is on page 45 of the financials. But from a high level, there's a variety of police donations that are being tracked within the general fund, some park equipment, and the majority of it, about 1.2, is for an infrastructure assignment. And so that's up about $173,000 from last year, and I'm going to circle back to that number in a second. Everything that's left, that 2.8, you can see is an unassigned, very, very close to last year. So in the end, at the end of the year, your general fund went from about 4 million up to 4.1, and in the middle of this page, you can see the actual column. It had a gain of $157,000. Okay. It got there because the revenues, as you can see, were over budget by $157,000 if you compare the actual to the final. That was driven primarily from building permits, and I've seen that at a lot of places this year, and the interest on investments. Interest on investments is kind of a mixed story. Some places that have a large portfolio of governmental securities, fixed income securities, they saw a big loss this last year because of unrealized amounts on those. They'll recover those till the end, but the village doesn't have those. They primarily invest in CDs and the state investment pool, and that had a very nice return over the last year. So that's what drove the majority of that gain compared to budget. Expenditures, you can see $5,000 under budget, pretty much breaking even. The main driver of that, which was offset by some things that were over budget, but police was under budget for the year. And the details of all this, again, are in the back of the financial statements on pages 57 to 59. Okay, so if you go to page 2, this is an analysis of your unrestricted general fund balance. And the village has a policy of trying to establish a minimum of 35%, and that's a light blue line, and a maximum of 40%. So not much of a story here. It's a flat line at 40% because you've been at that maximum amount for the last 5 years in a row, which brings me back to that infrastructure number that I just talked about, because that's the best indicator of the financial health or change in your general fund. And like I said earlier, that amount that you set aside for infrastructure went up $173,000 up to $1.2 million. And the whole concept is, and you can apply that towards future capital needs by reducing potential borrowings. So the general fund continues to be right on policy and applying that amount to infrastructure. If you're curious of other places we audit, and I do always caution against this, but those are those blue dots, and that's based upon population in Wisconsin. Okay. Any questions on the general fund? If not, I'll flip to page 3, and this is now page 3 and 4 are taking a look at the debt of the village. So a couple different ways to look at it. On page 3, how much debt is outstanding, and that black line charts out where you're at as far as utilizing your debt limit. And $58 million is where you stand for that. That's up about 4% from the prior year, okay? Again, 5% of the equalized value. The GO debt that gets counted against that is mapped out down below there in that reddish, orangish line. That went down $2.4 million from 21 to 22. So the actual percentage of the debt limit that you're utilizing at the end of the year is 38%. And you can see right above there that the village's policy is spelled out, and the intent is to keep that within 40% of the statutory limitations. Okay. I want to add, though, that if you look at the bottom, you can see a breakdown of the different components of the debt. And the GO debt, of the 22 that we just talked about, 8.7 is in utility funds. So even though it's backed by the ability to levy, the intent is what's going on is it's being paid from user charges. So if you backed out the utility debt, you wouldn't be at the 38%, you would be at 23% of your debt limit. And it was 28% last year. So either way you look at it, it went down 5 to 6%, and you're below your policy. Okay. You don't have any revenue bonds outstanding. I think those have been paid off for the last 3 years, I want to say now. Those are in existence in, I think, the sewer fund primarily. So you can see a snapshot of the debt. Then if you go to page 4, you can see what the village pays out of its governmental funds for debt service. So pretty consistent from year to year, and that's because the village, in working with municipal advisors, has good debt management in place, and that's what we're always looking for. So it's been hovering around 15 to 17%. We try to recommend, and it does vary from place to place, but we try to recommend to maintain that 20% or lower, and you've been below that every year for the 5 years presented here. Other places we audit, again, you can see a lot of places around pretty much in line with where the village is too, 16 to 19%. Okay. Any questions on the debt? We'll shift gears again, and the next few pages are taking a look at the utility funds of the village. And on page 5, this is the water utility funds. So again, some metrics, I'll touch on each one of these pages, pretty consistent from page to page the way we look at it. with one exception. The water utility, as you know, is regulated by the PSC in Wisconsin. And you can see your authorized rate of return went from 7% in 2021 to 4.9. That's just, again, that came through the rate application that you submitted. Going back a little ways, it was finally approved at the end of 2021. So those new rates are in effect. You can see your actual rate of return then went from 0.33 in 21 up to 4.34%. And that's evident in those lines as they're mapped out there. Your revenues in the green went from 1.4 up to 1.7, so up about 16%. You've seen the full impact of that rate increase in 2022. Expenses are very flat for the last 3 years, which is pretty typical of a water utility fund. It did bump up from 2019 to 20, but that was because of maintenance costs, increased depreciation on the capital or plant, purchase power and regulatory costs that have been flowing through there pretty consistently for the last 3 years at a little bit higher level. Then in the middle of the page, you can see an analysis of the unrestricted reserves. And when I talk about reserves, I'm talking about cash, unrestricted cash. The Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, recommends at a minimum of 3 months, but that's a national organization. For Wisconsin, our firm recommends you try to hold it more to 3 to 6 months because of the anticipated payment of pilot, as almost all water utilities do over the general fund, as well as routine capital that's not going to be financed with debt and such. So 3 to 6 months, you're at 9.6. So your water utility, even though it did go down a bit from the last year, is still healthy. And then your investment in capital is an analysis of how much of your plant or capital has been financed through earnings, which is the green, equity, or debt, which is the black. We generally say try to keep that at 50% or more through earnings, and this is at 82%. Okay? So no concerns there. Page 6 looks at your sewer utility, and you can see for this one, again, you had new rates that came into effect in, I think, November of 2021. So this is the first full year of that. You can see them moving from 1.4 up to $1.7 million. While expenses have been pretty steady, but inching upward a little bit. For year after year, though, the expenses exceeded the revenues in this. So this is the first year in the last 5 years that had actually a positive operating income, and that's because of those new rates. It was minimal, but you just did see those actually finally cross there. Healthy cash reserves in the middle, you can see 23 months. Some volatility in this. That's because the restrictions come from revenue bonds. And like I said, your revenue bonds have been paid off the last few years. Okay, so all the cash in there, with the exception of some equipment replacement that the DNR recommends, are in unrestricted. And so as that cash is being applied towards debt service and maintenance and everything else, it's coming out of the unrestricted. So you do see some volatility there. However, at 23 months, it's still healthy. And your investment in capital is at 89%, so very strong. It does have $3.8 million in GO debt outstanding. But again, that's well above that 50%. And then page 7, the Stormwater Utility Fund. A little bit different story here. You can see the revenues, expenses are almost at like a mirror image of each other year after year, with the exception of 2020. There was a failed culvert in that year, so the expenses did go up. But pretty narrow margin, and I would say essentially breaking even most years. This also had new rates that went into effect in December of 2021. Expenses went up too, though. So you saw the increase in revenues from those new rates, but you saw the expenses move along upwards with it. The expenses are in large part being driven by an allocation of labor and fringes, and so they did increase this year, as well as the incurred maintenance costs that flow through that fund. So this is one I would say keep an eye on the expenses, because even though the rates were increased, if you keep allocating expenses, to kind of match those revenues, it could cause further financial deterioration of this fund. And as you see in the middle here, the unrestricted reserve analysis, there actually is no cash in this fund. Okay, it went from about $98,000 at the end of 2021 to zero or negative. It actually owes the general fund about $26,000. So not a large amount, but you wouldn't want it to continue in that direction. This is not completely unique to stormwater funds because you set the rate, the revenues come in very consistently from year to year, and you've got the expenses that go through. If any type of maintenance is eventually needed, such as in 2020, expenses spike. So then the cash goes way down. So they operate on a pretty small margin. It's important to know where it's at, but it's also really important to see kind of where it's going because you don't want it to have to lean on the general fund too much. And in the middle, or at the bottom, investment in capital, 85%, again, no concerns there. This fund only has $160,000 outstanding in debt as of the end of the year. The last utility fund is page 8, the transportation. I hesitated even putting this together. Last year I just mentioned a few things, but what the heck? It's in year 2, so let's start plotting it out. The good news, the green line is above the black line, so you have a positive operating margin. You had a positive change in net position of about $45,000. Unrestricted reserves are at 29 months, but all the capital in this fund is being financed with debt. I mean, that's typical in a brand new utility fund. That's how you get it going, right? So it's at 0% as far as equity goes, but that will change over time. All right, any questions on the utility funds before I mention layman? One last, okay. Pretty consistent story with this fund for the last 3+ years, actually. I mean, when you establish this fund as a village, you hope the rates were good and everything, and it's been performing exactly as you had hoped. So consistent. You can see the assets are very consistent, increasing consistently each year. The liabilities are going down as the debt is slowly being paid off. And down in that summarized income statement, you can see it had positive operating income once again. I think it has every year since its inception of $78,000, and a positive, some non-operating things that flow through there every once in a while too, but that was positive as well of $66,000. So that fund's in good shape. Any questions on the numbers? No real concerns. I think the stormwater utility is the one to keep an eye on. But a large portion of that expenses can be controlled internally. So that's the good news on that side. The other document that we issued is the audit results. I'm not going to walk you through it. You have it available in front of you. It's required communications, points out any journal entries, material journal entries, or things such as that. So. Yes.
In this one book, and I'll how about that one?
Yep, that's the audit results.
On page 6, just above the heading, other comments, recommendations, there's a paragraph there that talks about that financial statements are not in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, and that there were some material misstatements in the general ledger. And then there's some other references to that. I mean, are these venial sins, or explain a little bit about that, because it sounds bad, but based on everything you're telling me, it doesn't sound like it's bad.
It does sound bad. Unfortunately, a lot of that language is driven by the AICPA that governs the auditing side of everything we do. And so basically there's auditing standards out there that say if we prepare your financial statements like we do for 90-some% of the governments we audit throughout the country, then we have to have that comment in there. Even if you prepare your own, which very few places have the internal resources to do that, especially in Wisconsin, and we have material entries, then we would still point that out. It basically is holding governments to the same standards as an SEC company, and that's just a high bar to achieve. So again, years ago, we did an internal analysis of all the reports we issued, and it was 90-some% of them. So we prepare your financials just like we do for a lot of places as a service, as a courtesy, because we deal with this. I do 25 a year myself. To do one a year, especially with all the other asks or commitments of staff here at the village, would be very, very challenging. So that's why that's in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I assume that based on everything else I saw, but
yeah,
I should ask.
That's a great question.
And just in general, I mean, what you've painted is a picture that, we're in a good place financially. We have our debt under control. We're putting money into the infrastructure fund despite all the headwinds that we have with the state. So that's all good. But just for the board, as far as this being sort of trying to look at the long picture, just in general, based on everything you've seen, are there any, I'll call them just general risks that you see out there, whether it's external, macro level kinds of things that are affecting everybody and we just need to be aware of it, but are there any of those kinds of risks that are out there that we should be paying attention to, that perhaps as we get through and start working on an update to our strategic plan, we should be really addressing proactively?
Well, I think with most governments your side, there's always the internal control risks of smaller decentralized departments collecting funds, right? Whether it's police, courts, parks, or wherever it may be, there's always risk with that. It may not be, material as defined by the standards, but even $100 of public funds is, you don't want that going missing for public trust and everything else. So anytime you have those decentralized collection points, it's good to have other compensating controls. Your review of the budget to actuals is a really great control. Asking questions about bills, why are things down or up? I mean, that's a great mitigating control. So, and that's with most places. Unless you can create complete separation, such as Waukesha County or larger entities, right? You just don't have the resources to do that. So that's one. I mean, then there's all the external factors of state funding, and there's a lot going on with that. Some positive news coming out recently. So you have to, consider those, and where do you turn for new revenue sources to fix the roads and everything else? You know that better than I do, the challenges associated with that, and fire and police and other services. So I think the village has done a nice job of trying to be proactive and explore different ways to fund those services. But outside of that, I don't know, I defer to you, Scott. Does anything keep you up at night?
No, John's been great, and his team have been great to work with. They're very probing in their questions, so even though we give them information, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing by pulling out the minutia of receipts and verifying things, and we do lean on them if we have questions on things throughout the year. Yeah, we try to find, as the board knows, find revenues where we can within the allowance of statutes and what Madison prescribes to us.
I did think of one other thing, and you may be ahead of me here, is, I'm going to meet with the library board tomorrow night, and wonderful facility and everything else. We'll be presenting their financials to them. And I know, maintenance and the buildings get a little older. I think the debt's 2 years from being paid off. Is that right?
1 or 2 years, yeah.
1 or 2, yeah. And there's some held in reserve for the final payment. So how will that be dealt with? And I know that's a decision between the village and the city and the library. So keeping that in sight so that it's not a sudden hit would be wise. Otherwise, that's a challenging question, especially for an auditor. We like to look back. It's hard to look forward. But it's a great question.
No, I know.
If I think of something right at home, I can shoot it to Scott.
Sometimes just stepping back from the detail to, if there's something you're seeing that we need to be aware of, that it's not just black and white.
Yeah, it's a very appropriate question for somebody like governing body, that's for sure.
When I was looking at this, it seemed like your report was a little bit different from past years, where you had the village's statement in there, and everything was very comprehensive. It made me a little bit concerned, so I'm glad to hear that everything seems to be okay. Especially, when I saw that with the library too, and that the fact that the financial statements are not prepared in conformity with the generally accepted accounting principles. That one had me worried, so I'm glad to hear that we're actually doing
try to
pretty
add some
good.
context to that as far as why that's in there.
Yeah, I'm guessing that'll be a question for tomorrow night as well.
It probably will. Yeah, I think we talk about that each year too.
Any other questions from anyone? John, I just have the normal question I ask every year. Compared to other communities, how is the village looking?
I think you're in good financial shape. You know, the stormwater funds, it's something to keep an eye on, but it's not, you know, it's not leaning onto the general fund where it's become detrimental or anything like that, or you have to come up with a financing plan. It is pretty common in a lot of governments that we audit where, you know, one or two funds are not in the greatest shape. And quite often that can be a brand new TIF, which you expect, you know, because the idea is to build that value over future years. So it can start off very negative with all the debt and everything that's been issued. Or one of the enterprise or utility funds not having appropriate rates, or the general fund not in a good place. So it can be a mix of things, but all the village's funds are in decent shape. I wouldn't say excessive compared to other places I see. I think your debt is managed really well. You know, it's very cyclical, and that's the way you've managed it since I've been working on the village's audit. So there's nothing really. I think you're. You know, it's hard to compare apples and apples across governments, but there's nothing in here that makes me think, oh, let me put it this way. I have 4 meetings that's in the first 3 days here of this week. And when I look across those, I think you guys are in good shape compared to other places I see. Yeah.
Is there anything more that the board could do to help staff or other departments?
That's a loaded question.
I know.
Yeah, it's more of a consultant's kind of role. So I think you do quite well with the resources you have and cross-training and such. So, and I know you've explored other options, but it seems to me for the week that we're here that things are functioning pretty well.
Any other questions? If there are none, John, I appreciate your time and thank you again for doing our audit.
Yep. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, next one is on the public hearing presentation. Item B is public hearing on ordinance number 2023-10, ordinance to amend sections 40.367.4, 40.367.5, 40.3677, and 40.367.8 of the Village of Pewaukee Municipal Code regarding garbage recycling bin storage, density limits, setbacks, yards, and open space requirements in residential infill redevelopment overlay district. I'll look for, is there anybody here that would like to make a comment or question? Okay, I'm gonna move right on then. Next item is hereby close the public hearing too, I'm sorry. Approval of minutes of the regular village board meeting dated June 6, 2023. I hope everyone's had a chance to look them over. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections as to the way they are presented this evening? And if not, I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion by Rhodey.
Second, Krasovich.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are hereby adopted. Item 4, citizen comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to share their opinions with board members on any topic they choose. However, due to Wisconsin open meeting laws, the board is not able to answer questions or respond to your comments. All comments should be directed to the board. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Speakers are asked to please use the podium and state their name and address. Is there anybody here that would like to make a comment at this time? Okay, we're going to go on then. Okay, item 5A, possible action on ordinance 2023-10, ordinance to amend sections 40.367.4, 40.367.5, 40.367.7, and 40.367.8 of the Village Municipal Code regarding garbage recycling bin storage, density limits, setbacks, yards, and open space requirements in residential infill redevelopment overlay district. Mary, are you here for this?
I am,
Okay.
sure. So back in March, I was in front of the board
at the request of then trustee Ed Hill, who did not make it here tonight. But he had asked that the village examine some proposed changes to the residential infill redevelopment overlay district. And I went through with the commission all of those specific line items that he had asked to be changed. Now, I know we have a new trustee back on board who wasn't here in March. So I'll leave it up to you whether you want me to go back through the discussion about the various specific changes that were requested. But before you call me on that, I'll tell you that where the board left it after you reviewed the changes that were requested was that you weren't particularly moved one way or the other, but referred it out to the planning commission properly for them to give a review, discussion, consideration, and possible recommendation to the village board on how to handle this. And the planning commission did take that up back in April, and the minutes of that meeting are in your packets tonight as well. But the planning commission really left the topic with no favorable recommendation to the village board. It was more of a let's leave it as it is, let more time pass, let's see what the ultimate outcome of the two already approved projects really looks like in the lay of the land, and how they perform from the standpoint of accessibility, density, all of those various factors, and reevaluate this maybe a year down the road, maybe 2 years down the road, when we have a really good operating example of developments done under these current regulations. So with that said, also I wanted to point out that though the Planning Commission did not give any specific guiding recommendation back to the village board, except to say that they remain satisfied with the language of the code as it's written, and simply return this item to the board, period. That's what they said. An ordinance has to be drafted to give you, now that it's back in front of you for public hearing and potential action, to give you something to act on this evening. And the ordinance is fairly suggestive, right? So it says things like the village board is aware that surrounding neighbors to these new development projects are concerned that the current combination of density, open space, setbacks and yards in this district might not allow adequately screened or enclosed space for storage of trash bins. Village is aware that recent development projects that have been approved are more dense than the surrounding neighbors might consider to be compatible with their neighborhoods. It says the village finds that modifying certain of the standards in this district would result in future projects that will be more compatible within their surroundings. It says that the village finds that adding a requirement to set aside a specific place on each lot within a development in this district for placement of screened storage of trash bins and so forth would be more compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. So those are very strong statements that suggest you have made these findings. And I don't know that you have. It's written more to predict the possibility that there would be a turnout at the public hearing that would sway you to these findings. So with all of that said, ultimately this really comes right back to the board to make that final decision about knowing how you felt about it when you first went over it in March, knowing how the commission reacted to it when the planning commission reacted to it when they went over it more recently, and now it's back here. How do you want to proceed? With that, I guess I'll turn it over to the commission. Let me know if you need any further clarification. Otherwise,
Is there anybody that would like to make a comment or question?
I'll make a quick comment. Yeah, I endorse no action at all in regard to this, just as the Planning Commission stated. I think the work that they did on this subject was solid.
I think consumers are voting with their dollars over at the Glen right now, which appears to be very successful with the amount of building that's going on. Could there be tweaking that takes place in the future? Possibly. But right now, there's no reason to do anything with this.
I agree with Bob.
Any other comments or questions? Do I have a motion to,
If we don't do anything, do we need a motion?
If you wanted to make a record of the fact that you have received the report from the Plan Commission and the draft ordinance and the election of the village board, is to take no action with regard to that report at this point. So you would have a placeholder in your minutes that you did look at this and how the board felt about it. So you don't have to deny the motion or deny the ordinance itself, but maybe have something in the record as to, you looked at it and you considered it and decided not to take any action for approval of the draft ordinance.
Well, with that, I will make a motion to take no action on the proposed amendment to the ordinance 2023-10 as presented in the packet.
Second, Rhodey.
you have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion is hereby adopted. Item B, thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciate that. Possible action on ordinance number 2023-11, ordinance to amend section 6.121 of the Village of Pewaukee Municipal Code regarding license fees of intoxicating liquor or fermenting bulk beverages within the village. Cassie?
Sure. So, back at a previous meeting.
Sorry.
On a previous meeting, we discussed, if we were to get a license, what would we charge, or what is the charge for a reserve license? Currently, we charge $10,000. That's the minimum from the state. And you've seen later in the agenda that what's on it, and thought that we should get something in an ordinance as far as price goes for that. So I kind of gave a couple different scenarios there. And then as Scott and I were talking, we were thinking too, and yes, let us know if we can, but let's say we decided that $30,000, let's say, was the price of the transfer license. Would then we charge a different price, or could we charge a different price if it was surrendered after the initial? I don't know how you guys feel about that, or if we can even do that.
Well, I think to help expand on that too, right now with the reserve license, when it's a $10,000 license fee per statutes, and whenever that license changes hand, the next owner of the recipient of that license pays a $10,000 fee. So if there were a transfer license that were to be obtained by the village, and the board were to agree, say, on a $30,000 fee for that initial license, if that license were surrendered and transferred at a later date, would the board want to see that license continue at $30,000 for the next recipient at that license, or be reduced to a different amount? Trying to find the parallel with the reserve license.
What are other communities doing?
Honestly, I'm not aware that there's a lot of communities that are transferring license at this
Right.
point.
That's right.
We're kind of treading new water on that one, going in a new direction.
Once again, huh?
Yes.
So they pay this fee just at the issuance of the license, or is it an annual fee?
Just at the issuance, and then the renewal for the person who has that same license, it's, I think, $600, or those are the
That's
other
what these
amounts.
fees are?
listed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right, and that transference, we incur the initial charge, but then after that point, it's ours.
correct. Yeah, once,
It's like a
if we
one-time
acquire it
thing.
from another
Right.
community, we pay that charge once
And
to
then
that
some.
community, but then how does the board want the recipient of that license to, what amount does the board want that recipient to be paying? And then again, if it transfers at a later date, does the new holder at that point pay the amount that it was initially charged, or a lower amount?
Is 30,000 the highest it can go?
That was my other question.
I think 30,000 is, that number is in DOR literature, as you might have seen, for Premier Economic Development Districts, which is an entity that the legislature allowed to be created. Probably the Tittleton District is one example of a PED. So you get 2 licenses for that, and you have to charge $30,000 for licenses within that district. So where another community might come up with that number, I guess my suspicion is if a community is looking at $30,000 as that charge, that might be what they're looking at or where they're getting that number from.
But they could charge a different amount
They could
if
charge,
they preferred.
I think it's at least 10,000 for a transfer, because that's probably a reserve license that they're transferring to another community.
So what would happen in a situation if let's say we could get a license from another community and they want 35, and we've got in our books 30, do we have to then go through a process of changing that here before we can do that? I mean,
If that's the amount that you ultimately decide you want to pass through, I'll defer to Mark.
Well, you could include language to say that, at least at the initial issuance of a transferred license from another community would be the village's actual cost of acquiring that license. So you-
okay.
You know,
See, that's what I was worried about, is having some flexibility built in
Exactly,
so that we
Yeah.
can do that. Okay.
but then thereafter, or any transfers of that same license, you could have it just be the standard reserve amount.
Okay. That'd be my preference, is give us some flexibility, however that's worded.
And that way you're not subsidizing.
Well, no,
We don't wanna do
can't Absolutely.
Any other comments?
Well, I think the transfer fee needs to at least be whatever our charge is to the other municipality.
Right, that's what I wanted, I want the flexibility in that.
Yep. And then reissuance, I think it should go in line then. The reserve, if it were to be surrendered.
So like, let's say 30,000 for if we were to get one and then they surrendered it, the next people would just pay the 10,000. Okay.
Are there any other comments? Can I get a motion? It does say that we need action on it, so.
Well, to do a motion, I think we're gonna need some help on the wording, because in the document here, it has a flat 30,000 in there, and if we want to add some flexibility, then we need some,
Yeah, I think what I heard was 30,000 or actual cost per village to obtain the license, and then reissuance of said license would be the regular reserve
Transfer,
license
reserve,
fee.
sorry.
okay.
So would someone like to make a motion to that effect?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the draft ordinance 2023-11 to amend section 6.121 regarding intoxicating liquor fermented malt beverages, specifically for the reserve Class B combination at 10,000, the transfer Class B combination at the cost or 30,000. And
Yeah.
subject to what Mark had recommended. Just, you've written down,
Yeah.
so.
And then it would become a reserve license if it transferred, if it moved again?
Yes, and then upon renewal, reserve.
Does everybody understand the motion? Okay, I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion is hereby adopted. Next thing on the agenda is resolutions. Possible action on resolution number 2023-07, resolution providing for the sale of approximately $1.185 million in general obligation promissory notes Scott?
So we have an update to what you have in the packet, and Brad Ragud is here again to help walk through scenarios. In talking with Dan at the end of last week, who Dan was working with Dixon Engineering, our consultant engineer for the Quinlan Tower Rehab Project. The belief with the current schedule as it is, with trying to get the document out to bid and coordinating relocation of antennas with cell carriers, and by the time the project would be ready to start would be post-September, which is not a good time to start that project. So with that, their recommendation is to defer that project to 2024. Bid in early part of the year, with commencing it would be after April 15th or the like. So what that would do is reduce the borrowing from 1.15 million to $670,688. And in talking with Brad today, his recommendation, I think, and I'll certainly let Brad speak for himself, is that the bank placement that we were looking at originally might not be the most economical, and then it might behoove us to look at a state trust fund loan instead of a bank placement. And with that, you wouldn't have the issuance fee, fees with Baird's assistance on the bank placement, as well as I think Quarles and Brady on doing some of the legwork as well. State trust is right now it's a 5.5% interest rate. If we were to go that route and not take the funds until after September 1, there would be no payment due until March of 2025. And as the board may recall, when we're looking at the bank placement, we're looking at refinancing this with the 2024 issuance. We would still be able to do that if we were to go the route of a state trust. Brad, anything on or your thoughts?
I mean, that covers it really well.
I remembered well from our conversation.
Yeah. I mean, just the bottom line is a state trust fund loan is a lower cost option if you're going to reduce the borrowing to $670,000. Once you're around that $1 million range, that's about the break even, $900,000 to $1 million. Well, certainly at the level we were talking about, the 1.185 million, the bank placement would have been a lower cost option even with the issuance cost. So ultimately, the village could wrap that state trust fund loan into the long-term financing next year, or you could leave that outstanding. If, for example, if rates increase substantially, maybe you leave that outstanding at 5.5%. But if rates stay the same or are lower, we could pull that into one long-term borrowing.
So, and just a question for Brad. If we go to the route of state trust, is there a recommended term that would we look at, say, a 15-year and still plan on refinancing, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the shortest term that the state offers is 2 years. I wouldn't look at that. The interest rates are 5.5% regardless of term at the state right now. I'd say at least a 5-year, maybe a 10-year. And if we pay this off next year, whether we're doing a 5-year or a 10-year doesn't increase the total cost to the village because the debt is outstanding for the same amount of time. But if you're in a situation that we want to leave that issue outstanding, you've got a longer term structure in place. You're not forced to do a refinancing to find a longer term home for that debt package.
And this particular loan, we can pay off at any time without any penalties.
Between January 1st and September 1st, that loan can be paid off anytime without penalty. After September 1st up until January 1st, there's a no-call provision annually. So we just want to, if we do want to pay it off, we want to get your long-term financing closed 30 days before September 1st, because there is a 30-day call notice required to the state. But you're correct, there's no penalties or fees for that early payment.
So okay, if I'm getting this correct, so 2 years from now, if we decide we want to pay this off, we could?
Yeah, every year you could. Every year you can make that decision, and then the allowable period is from January 1 to September 1. That's the prepayment period. But that's a decision that could be made annually.
Any comments or questions? I'm kind of liking that idea.
So if we were to do a shorter term, like a 5-year, effectively more of the payment that we're making, it's gonna be higher, obviously, but it's gonna be more principal applied than if we did a 10-year. So when we do wrap that into the bond, we will have some of that principal paid off, so we wouldn't have to fund the whole 600,000 through the bonds.
So if you wait until 2025 to pay off the state trust fund loan, then you're correct. But if we'd pay that off, say, next year in '24, you will not have made any payments on the state trust fund loan. So there's no payment.
Pay for free.
No, that's, you'll pay the interest through the new issuance of debt, but you wouldn't have made any budgeted payments on the state, if it closes after September 1st. If you decide to have this loan funded before September 1st, then you would need to include a payment on March 15th of '24 in your upcoming budget.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I believe the construction schedule is to start in August, so first payout would be September, so I think timing would work, and receipt of funds from state trust is usually fairly quick once we give them notice, the date as to when we're looking to have the funds received.
And procedurally, what you would have a resolution back on the an upcoming board meeting, could be next month, authorizing the state trust fund loan. So there's no resolution tonight for the state trust fund loan. What we have on here is a resolution for the $1,185,000 borrowing. If you're going to reduce that, you would probably want to defer action on this tonight, come back at a future meeting to take action.
Are there any other questions or comments? Somebody like to make a motion to defer this?
I have one question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So the actual amount of 670,000, what exactly is that to pay for?
That would be split between funds for road projects, funds for water utility projects for this year, which I think the bulk of those are related to roads. There's also a Well 2 a rehab project and some expenses related to the Quinlan Tower project for primarily, I think, consultant engineering fees. Sewer utility, actually sewer utility is all going to be paid for through funds on hands. And then stormwater utility projects of 142, so those would be funded through future budgets.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Do I have any motion or action?
Our direction, I think, would be looking based on information of direction to proceed with preparing paperwork for a state trust fund loan.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Well, you're not going to defer this because you're going to be doing something different, so you've really given direction to staff to proceed in that direction, so I don't think you'll have to take action on a motion.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I was being legal here. Okay, possible action on resolution number 2023-08, resolution regarding the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources reporting year 2022 compliance maintenance annual report, which we all look forward to.
No offense, Dan.
Dan?
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
So this is one of two annual reports that you see that require resolutions. This is our compliance maintenance annual report required by the DNR for our wastewater collection system. This year, this was primarily all the data collection and data entry was done by Sean Tremaine. He's our Public Works employee who was promoted to Utility Operations Supervisor. So he did all the heavy lifting on this. I did some review and a little editing and validated the report. And I'm presenting it, but probably next year, it may be him standing here. So I will run through the report for you here. Everybody here has seen this before, at least once. So there's two sections. There's the financial management and then the collection system management. And it's all kind of not very exciting stuff. It just asks when you looked at your user charges, your revenues. We have an equipment replacement fund that is for Lift Station 1 that we maintain. So the numbers that you see here in Section 3 are related to Lift Station 1 equipment maintenance. We always put down some projects, future projects that are going to be on the wastewater side. They ask about our electricity consumption for some reason. So we track all of our electric bills for all the lift stations. And then a number of operational questions. The one regarding energy efficiency and future projects. The comment there is that the Kottmeyer lift station will be replaced in its entirety, so that will be all new, modern facilities there. And that should be under construction next year. That's in design right now. Under the collection system, the underlying document for this report is the CMOM, and that is sort of a self-policed document that we sort of created in 2016, and then we're supposed to generically follow that. That's also on Sean's list. The last time I amended and updated that was, I think, in 2020 or 2021. But again, it's something that it's our system. We set our own goals, and then we're supposed to meet those goals. And in this case, we didn't meet a goal. Our annual manhole inspections, we had 11% of our system, and we have a goal of 15%. It's not going to result in any kind of demerits or lower grade or anything. Again, the goals are you set your goals, and then you attempt to achieve them. What else? We've got questions about flow, about rehab, about replacements. All that information is in here. Our average daily flows that we send to the treatment plant. The one thing, actually there's three things I wanted to inform you about of projects from last year. So we replaced a sanitary sewer on the north side of Park Hill subdivision. That project was an upsizing. There was 12-inch pipe both downstream and upstream of that section. It's about 1,300 feet. That was replaced for capacity reasons. That was a restriction in the system. We did some other cool stuff there. I mean, there were some gigantic trees that were essentially over the top of the pipe. I removed those. There was one spot where people had sump pump discharges going into that area where the pipe was, and there was a swamp in there about the size of this room. And we went in there and kind of put a drainage swale in there with a drain tile and connected one or two of those sump pump discharges into that drain tile. So now that whole area stays dry. As part of the restoration, I had them essentially build a road over the pipe. So now we can drive our vac truck down all the way back there, 1,500 feet off High Street, back in there, whereas before we could have gone about 200 feet and we would have been buried in the axles because the whole thing was just a wet swamp. So it's completely accessible now to get back in that sewer easement, whereas before it was not. The Glen at Pewaukee Lake added about 2,800 feet of sanitary sewer. That's now village owned. And then East Wisconsin was various ages, but it was pretty old. It was 1930s, 1940s vitrified clay sewer pipe. That was about 2,100 feet of relay. And then every sewer lateral that was connected to that was also replaced out to the right-of-way line. It's kind of all the high points here. But I do indicate that we see higher flows during rain events. It's kind of obvious to see that when we have heavy rains. We pump a lot more water at Lift Station 1. So that's in here. Based on our report, our grade is an A, and just asking to adopt the resolution that was in the packet, acknowledging that you've been apprised of the report.
Are there any questions or comments? Do I have a motion then?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2023-08, adopting the 2022 reporting year sanitary sewer systems, CMAR.
Second, Rhodey.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion, resolution 2023-08 is hereby adopted. Thank you, Dan. Welcome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Item 7, old business, we have none. Item 8, new business. Discussion and possible action on approval of Lake Park HOA Declaration of Restrictions Amendment 1. Scott or Mark? Mark, I guess.
So we received a request from the Lake Park Homeowners Association that the village board consent to the amendment of their HOA declarations, which is the operating agreement for the HOA. And the amendment would be for the purpose of putting a restriction on residents of that subdivision for basically renting out their properties, a subject that you've dealt with here at the board level for the village as a whole recently. So the reason that it's coming before you is that when the original association was approved, the village required that any amendments to the declaration of restrictions receive the approval of the village board. And the primary reason for that is to make sure that there's nothing by way of modification of those declarations that would impact any of the approvals that the village originally gave for the creation of the subdivision. So that's all well and good, except that they are asking for basically an outright prohibition regarding the rentals of the properties within that subdivision. As you recall, state statute preempts the village from requiring that or enacting any such restriction overall. And so arguably, if the village were to approve this amendment as presented, we would be endorsing the modification of their rules to do something that we'd be prohibited to do as a village board otherwise. So I called the attorney for the association and, informed him of my concern. And I suggested that we would just have an approval, we would just have action to say that the village is waiving its rights in this instance only to approve this amendment to the declaration. And he said that that would be acceptable. So in your package, you've got my letter that includes at the end a proposed language for a action by the board if you agree with my advice. Any questions?
If there are
Beauty is its simplicity.
If there's no questions, I would look for a motion to adopt the suggestion that was given by the village attorney as it states in his letter.
Well, I'll give it a shot. Hopefully I word this correct. So I'll make a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the request to approve the amendment to the Lake Park Homeowners Association Declaration of Restrictions as presented here, and that the village is waiving its right on this specific issue, and that we further direct staff to advise the association and its attorney of this action. Is there any piece I missed?
That's good.
Second, Rhodey.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby adopted. Get back to my main screen here. Okay, discussion and possible action on acceptance of water main easement from Pewaukee School District. Scott?
Yeah, what you have before you is a softball field project the school district is pursuing that to take, and it requires the relocation of the existing water management area that's outside of the turf area, so the document before you has been drafted to adjust that water main easement. And the attachment, or easement exhibit A, reflects the new location of the water main easement. This is required just to provide us with means of access for maintenance going forward and have it documented.
Any questions or comments? Do I have a motion then?
I'll make a motion to approve the revised water main easement with the Pewaukee School District.
Second, Krasovich.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. License approval, license permit approvals, the annual alcohol licenses. Okay, let me get down to that one. Okay, the first one is for, I will look for a motion to approve applicants for Class A beer license and Class A liquor cider only license as
Presented in the packet.
presented.
So moved, Krasovich.
Second, Gergen.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Next one is applicants for Class A combination license, Class A beer and Class A liquor. Approve as presented this evening.
So moved, Krasovich.
Gergen.
You have a motion and a second. Comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Applicants for Class B beer license, I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second, Rhodey?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby adopted. Applicants for Class B combination license, Class B beer and Class B liquor. Artisan, the agent is Chen Young? Asiana, I'm sorry.
I'm not even gonna try to say that.
So that's the only change?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll look for a motion to approve with the change for artisan, Asiana, I'm sorry.
Motion to approve with the change for Asiana.
Second, Krasovich.
Okay, any questions, comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion is hereby carried. Applicants for Class B beer and Class C wine license, I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second, Rhodey?
Questions, comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Again, motion is hereby carried. Item 8C2, food vendor licenses. I will look for a motion to approve as presented the Summer Sizzle event, Belgian waffles.
Motion to approve food vendor permit application as presented for Belgian waffles with toppings.
Second, Gergen.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Item 8D2 is for, again, food vendor license for the beach party event. I'll look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve as presented. Second.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby adopted. Item 8C2, food vendor license again for the beach party event. I'll look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve, Rhodey?
Second, Roberts.
Comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion is hereby carried. Item 8C2 is again for a food vendor license for the beach party. I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve as presented, Gergen?
Second, Krasovich.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion again is hereby carried. Agenda 8C3, approval of temporary Class B retailers license. I'll look for a motion to approve as presented.
Sorry, this is a 26-person event? Motion to approve as presented?
Second, Gergen?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Questions, comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. And that looks, and motion is hereby carried, and that looks like it. Okay, the next one is monthly approval of checks and invoices for all funds dated May 2023, except for the library. I will look for a motion to approve as presented.
Motion to approve, Rhodey?
Second, Krasovich.
Any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. I will look for a motion to acknowledge the checks and invoices for the library, May of 2023.
Motion to acknowledge the library.
Second, Roberts.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. There are no there's no citizens in the room for citizen comment. So we'll go right to item 10, closed session. The Village Board of the Village of Pewaukee will enter in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute Section 1985 1E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive bargaining reasons require closed session, specifically regarding a Class B reserved liquor license transfer agreement. I will look for a motion to go into closed session, please.
Motion.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Okay. Trustee Belt?
Yes.
Trustee Krasovich?
Yes.
Trustee Roberts?
Yes.
Trustee Gergen?
Yes.
Trustee Rhodey?
Yes.
President Knutson?
Yes, we are hereby closed session. Please turn your And we'll wait for Scott. Okay, item 11, possible action on purchase of a reserve Class B intoxicating liquor license from the town of Delafield. Do I have any action on that?
I'll make a motion to direct staff to purchase the reserve Class B liquor license from the town of Delafield.
Second, Rhodey.
How much?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, item 12 is adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Second, Gergen.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone.